Episode 61, Dysentery Has Got Us, May 1943. I'm lying in the makeshift field hospital, and I'm so weakened that I'm hardly able to get up. Dysentery has got us after all. We don't know exactly where it originated, but I'm assuming that the drinking water here was somehow tainted. The doctors are only able to provide rudimentary care for us here. We're supposed to be moved into a larger field hospital in the hinterland. From my crew, 3 men have been afflicted, and all are doing really bad. The radio operator and the commander apparently must have a pig's stomach or are drinking a lot of schnapps to fight the bacteria. The gut aches were really severe. It's already slowly going better, but having to go to the bathroom 10 to 15 times a day does weaken you quite a lot. An effort is made to keep everything clean, but in this small town, that's not always feasible. After a few days, we're loaded with stretchers onto a medical truck and are supposed to be brought to the next larger city. It's supposed to go to Stalino, but only half the city is still in one piece. We rumble off, and the ride turns into a nightmare. The roads, of course, are bad, and in our condition, it's a torture anyway to be lying down in a rocking vehicle. We're trying to endure it, but every 30 minutes, the medic knocks up front against the cab so that we can, with much commotion, climb out of the truck and crouch down in the roadside ditch. It stinks, it's painful, and the entire lower region is already raw and inflamed. On top of that, we have lice. It's simply terrible. The ride is getting ever worse, and during the 7th stop, I almost tumble off the truck bed, since I'm barely able to stay on my feet. It's almost 100 kilometers that we have to drive, but it seems like 20 hours. In the evening, we finally arrive at the large field hospital and are brought separately into an area for patients with diarrhea. There, big wash tubs have already been set up for us, and we're getting rid of our uniforms right away. Then it goes into the tubs. We're thoroughly soaked down by the helpers there, some Russians also among them. The water is even lukewarm. Even when you're feeling really bad, you're still a bit happy about such a bath. After that, a good dusting of the body with anti-lice powder. The rear exit is supplied with a lot of healing balm and with fresh pajamas. We come into a wing of the building where apparently there are also more bathrooms than elsewhere. A robust nurse loudly explains the rules during bathroom visits and the rules of hygiene, so that we now slowly rid ourselves of the diarrhea bacteria. A small ray of light. There are lots of vitamins and frequently some strong broth to give the body some strength again. After a further 4 days there, I'm slowly feeling better. The bathroom visits are becoming a bit fewer. I read a lot and write a few letters home. I also put my experiences of the last weeks on paper. Thus time goes by fast, and I want to take notes of everything that's important. We're 8 men in the room. Most of them are from my unit. A few Air Force soldiers are also present. Ground personnel from an airfield in the vicinity. They're also presumed to have dysentery, but during a conversation, we find out that they'd brewed some schnapps, and apparently something with that wasn't in order. Oh well, we won't tell anyone. An older non-commissioned officer of an Air Force anti-aircraft unit has a small chess game, so we use the time to play a few rounds. He tells a lot of his adventures and what one experiences with the Red Flyers and also with our own. During an attack a few weeks ago, he had been on the 20mm as the gun commander. He and the comrades were properly pouring it onto the Russian ground attack planes. He says that those really had a pretty thick skin, but there were also spots where such a plane didn't take a hit very well. On this particular day, 4 planes were attacking the airbase. One had been shot down early already. Another later turned away smoking. The last 2 apparently wanted a decision. The anti-aircraft guns on half-track, 3 of them, were sending the anti-aircraft shells against the enemy, apparently to no effect. But then one plane pulled up. One could see a trail of smoke. Usually, the Russians will then try to get away, but not in this case. He approached anew and received some considerable hits. Despite that, he didn't pull up, and while he was already aflame, the Russian steered his plane right into the flak gun of a comrade. A giant explosion, the plane in 1,000 pieces, the entire flak gun destroyed. No one survived that. When the attack was over, one still tried to help, but the force and the detonation on impact had torn up everything. There, the Russians are hurling themselves to death, just as long as the enemy dies. Now it's my turn, and I also tell of a few adventures with the Russian tanks. There, I've thought several times already about what might be going on in the Red Army soldiers' minds. But so far, no enemy tank has ever rammed into me in order to destroy us. We simply don't allow them to come that close. We talk about partisans and my adventures in the forest with the woman who didn't want to surrender. Yes, the comrade also has such a story. They were on the way to another airfield and were supposed to make the trip with 3 half-tracks and 2 ammo trucks through actually secure area. The field car driving in the lead set off an explosive charge, and behind the convoy, trees also fell onto the roadway. The forest was quite light. The vehicles spread out and tried to get away from the main trail into cover through the woods. Then, from all sides, infantry fire set in on them. The platoon leader, a young lieutenant, jumped from the vehicle and assigned fire sectors. Then the gunners began to shoot at the muzzle flashes of the attackers with flak ammunition. No opponent can take this for long, and after half an hour, the fight was over. To the lieutenant, that was not enough. A 20mm was reloaded again and pursued the remaining fleeing partisans. My chess partner took part with his half-track. The partisans made it to a small village and barricaded themselves there. From a good position, the houses were taken under fire. The poor huts offered little protection, and the anti-aircraft shells took care of the rest. Here, too, the partisans were utterly defeated. Later, the soldiers checked whether anything there was still moving. What the unit hadn't known was that the farmers' families had still been inside the houses. Men, women, and children were either burned or torn to pieces by the blast effect of the ammunition. Gruesome images which burned themselves into the head. It didn't appear too easy for him to tell this. He was a father himself. The partisans also liked to use the civilian population as shields. A dirty subject. By now, we've been here for 10 days, and I'm doing pretty well already. Every 3 days, we're properly scrubbed down and powdered, and due to the good food supply, we're getting quite quickly back to strength. The temperatures outside are rising. The month of May has begun. The mud slowly seems to disappear, and apparently the supply is again rolling to the front. The situation is, despite everything, quite stable. You only hear of minor battles. The Russian probably has to recover from the blows in the last months. Here, we're able to read the frontline newspaper, and apparently, on the entire Eastern Front, the next big offensive is being prepared. Then it will finally go forward again, over the dry ground, and with sufficient units. It won't be long until we've been with the Russians for 2 years. This summer, we should finally wrestle the bear to the ground. I truly believe if one takes Moscow, then Ivan will lay down the arms. Without his capital, it won't amount to much. My opposite and I talk about it, and he reminds me of Napoleon and the capture of Moscow. I agree with him, but those were also different times. Now, one can also capture such a city and hold it if the supply routes remain open. Everyone there has his own opinion, but actually all are in good spirits that we'll soon achieve a decision here. Only one non-commissioned officer in our room appears to not quite believe in the final blow. A wave of disbelief wallows up against his opinion. He's somehow saying it through the grapevine, but one hears the doubts out of it. He should keep his mouth shut is shouted at him across the room if he was questioning the success of the troops in the East. He appears to be smart enough because he's holding back with his opinion. When we're allowed to walk around a bit already, I seek out a conversation with him offside. I promise to keep his opinion to myself, and since he's also a man from northern Germany, he trusts me. He starts to cast a different light on the events of war. Poland had been over quickly. France had been no problem. Russia wasn't working out as quickly as expected. The Americans weren't quite in the mix yet, but the Russian with his possibilities in men and materiel would destroy us. I can't believe what he's trying to tell me there, but he states I should think about it. how many comrades we had already lost, how many tanks and airplanes we had left with the enemy. Certainly, the Russian had also been hit hard, but he appears not to have any lack of men. Over and over again, tanks and artillery kept coming, as did airplanes, and now even the American tanks. Then the air assaults on German territory, then Stalingrad. "Come on, Rudolf. Wake up," he implores. "If we can't beat the Russian this summer, then the Reds will overrun us." He makes me think, but I really don't want to harbor these thoughts. We will find the decision here in the East, and then it's going home. That's what I believe in. After further days of recuperation, we're once again longing for action, and I hope that I can soon return to the troops. Convalescent leave is not granted. For that, we're doing too well. A few days later, I'm discharged together with 2 comrades, and we're looking for a transport back to our unit. One leg, we're able to ride by train. The remaining 50 kilometers, we then attempt to go by truck or whatever means we find to move on. It turns out to be very tough going, mostly because we're underway as 3. I think for the remainder of the way, we should split up and try our luck alone. Egon and Gunther are trying it with the pioneers. I'm looking for a spot as a ride along with the reconnaissance. Indeed, that works out, and in the evening, I'm back with my company. I report back to the Sarge, then I go over to my commander. I'm standing at his quarters and knock. A muffled "come in" resounds. I open the door and I'm shocked. The young, dynamic senior ensign does not look good at all. Half of his right ear is missing, and a swollen wound, stitched together with sutures, goes across half his face. He explains to me that he'd just taken off the bandages, and it was looking worse than it is. Already, I'm afraid whether Rosinante is still in one piece, but I say nothing. He sits down, pours me a glass of wine, and tells me about his injury. They had tossed together a few crews and had made a limited advance against Russian infantry and anti-tank rifles. Everything went well, and when the battle subsided, he was looking out of the turret hatch with the binoculars. A round from an anti-tank rifle then hit the upper edge of the commander's hatch, and the shrapnel or parts of the projectile deeply tore open his cheek and tore off part of the ear. The doctor stated that he'd been very lucky. A centimeter further, and the skull would have been penetrated. That way, it had only gotten his beret and his face. It would all heal, but a scar would probably remain. He tells that the brothers of his fraternity had always rubbed salt on the wounds in their face so that the fencing cuts were later presentable. He had never been hit in the face during fencing, but now he also had a large scar. He attempted to smile, but one could see that it's very painful for him. I told him about the military hospital and that I'm now well again. It could get going again, I add. He seems to be happy that I'm here again. In the next few days, we're supposed to support a pioneer unit. A path through mines had to be cleared. A river crossing was to be constructed again. We'd be along as security. That sounds pretty good. I sign off and go to my quarters. The old comrades are happy about my return, and I was glad that the ranks here haven't become thinner.